Hey guys, tonight we stand at the mouth of history's darkest crypt. The air thick with secrets and the faint, ominous promise of something long buried clawing to be free. Imagine stone pillars looming overhead as you peer into a coffin that hasn't breathed in over 4 centuries, trust me. You won't survive this without a shudder. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Tonight, we're not talking about the radiant glory of Queen Elizabeth I during her reign, but about the silent, cold fate of her corpse. Buried deep in utter darkness. Imagine the scene. Massive, icy granite slabs concealing a secret over 4 centuries old, where the splendor of royalty has turned into endless solitude. Elizabeth Tudor, affectionately called Gloriana by Europeans, the last virgin queen of the Tudor dynasty, ruled England for a full 4 years. Her name became synonymous with unwavering loyalty, profound respect, and, at times, unforgiving hatred. Under her rule, England navigated countless twists of history, noble rebellions, brutal battles between Catholics and Protestants, and a web of court intrigues that determined the fate of the throne. Amidst these storms, only one person possessed both the resolve and the wisdom to hold the crown steady, and that was Elizabeth. When Philip II of Spain sent his mighty armada to wipe England off the map, driven by religious zeal and political ambition, many European powers bet on her downfall, but Elizabeth was more than a cultural icon or a symbol of female authority. She was the strategist, the commander, and the very spark that ignited the English navy. On the Salticos, stained decks of wooden warships, Tudor banners snapped defiantly in the wind, carrying the spirit of independence and freedom through cunning tactics using small, agile ships to outmaneuver the Spanish behemoth. She shattered the so-called fleet wall, sending the armada to pieces in the fog and cannon smoke of the English Channel. Defeating the Spanish armada was more than a military triumph. It marked England's transformation. Art, literature, and science flourished overnight. Shakespeare began crafting the plays that would become legendary. Geographic exploration surged forward, and expeditions set sail for distant horizons. Elizabeth's reign became known as England's Golden Age, where myth and reality intertwined in every story and every weathered manuscript we still treasure today. Yet, despite her supreme power and profound wisdom, Elizabeth I could not escape her greatest fear, death. As night fell and the bedclothes grew cold, she would have heard the whispers of the Grim Reaper drifting outside her windows. Over 40 years on the throne, she witnessed endless assassination, plots from poisoned goblets to blades glinting in the castle shadows. Not even family was safe. Her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, once rebelled and was executed by Elizabeth's own order. No one could be fully trusted in a court where every wary glance might conceal a fatal dagger. When her final breath slipped away in the royal bedchamber, Elizabeth faced her ultimate terror: that her corpse would be dissected in the most brutal manner of the Middle Ages. It is hard to imagine, but in the 16th century, embalming was not a reverent ritual, it was a savage dissection. The body was laid on a chilling stone slab, flesh slit open, and organ shot. Lungs, liver, stomach, intestines were removed by hand. Then the cavities were packed with powerful spices, cloves, cinnamon, myrrh, ingredients normally reserved for royal feasts or sacred rites, here used solely to mask the stench of impending decay. In her final agonizing hours, she pleaded with her physicians, spare her body untouched, intact, so she might stand before God as she lived. But royal decree could not defy the laws of nature. On the 24th of March, 1603, the day that closed the glorious Tudor era, Her royal protections vanished. The doctors did their duty. They opened her chest, removed the heart, the symbol of a nation's hope, and extracted the rest of her organs. These sacred parts were sacrificed not to honor her, but to prevent her corpse from exploding during the state funeral. The chemical reaction inside her body generated gas pressure so great that, without a thick lead coffin and the crimson velvet embroidered with Tudor roses surrounding her, the funeral would have become a public disaster, a corpse bomb spewing fragments of fabric and flesh before thousands of mourners. It was for this very reason the physicians rigidly adhered to embalming protocols, not out of reverence, but for public safety. Once sealed, her coffin was placed aboard the royal barge and drifted down the grey Thames beneath Gothic stone bridges, an image both solemn and haunting. Thousands lined the riverbank in silent tribute, trembling at the faint scent they sensed, a mingling of sweet spice and the dank odour of decaying flesh. A fleeting reminder of mortality. Her final resting place was Westminster Abbey, beneath towering stones and vaulted ceilings that spoke of divine majesty and human transience. From the outside, her tomb appeared magnificent, promising eternal rest. But beneath those silent slabs lay an unending struggle between flesh and time, between royal legacy and the immutable laws of nature. Every cunning scheme and supreme power ultimately crumbles and returns to the earth. And that is the beginning of our journey into Queen Elizabeth I, tomb where history's glittering veneer is stripped away, leaving only a body ravaged by time, reminding us that no authority can triumph over birth, aging, sickness, and death. Next, we will venture deeper into the crypt, where Elizabeth and her half-faced sister Mary lie locked together, sharing a bitter fate. Behind the layers of makeup and the sumptuous robes that once showcased Queen Elizabeth I's power lay a soul perpetually haunted by death's shadow. When she donned the crown, she bore not only the burden of a realm, but also the paralyzing fear of her own mortality. Death, the one adversary that royal authority could never vanquish. Across her 44-year reign, Elizabeth witnessed countless assassination plots, betrayals, and court intrigues lurking like spectres in the corridors of power. The grand halls that echoed with ceremonial laughter often harboured the hiss of poison being poured into goblets and the glint of blades waiting in the darkness. None of these betrayals cut deeper than the tragedy of her own cousin, Mary, Queen of Scotia bloodkin, yet also her fiercest rival, born of the same Tudor line. They once shared family celebrations and royal banquets, but ambition strained their bond. In 1587, Mary was convicted of treason and executed at Fotheringhay Castle. The Queen who signed Mary's death warrant was none other than Elizabeth herself, wielding her pen with icy resolve. Though crowned a victor in the eyes of Europe, Elizabeth never escaped the guilt of ordering her cousin's execution. In the hush of her private chambers, she could still hear Mary's anguished pleas echoing from beyond the grave. Yet nothing was more horrifying than the brutal, embalming ritual of the 16th century, a process devoid of mercy. Invasive and ruthless, when Elizabeth finally breathed her last, she longed for a dignified farewell. Reality, however, allowed no such grace. The court physicians, compelled by duty, ignored her final entreaties and carried out the mandatory embalming as a matter of state necessity. Her body was laid upon a cold, stone slab, surrounded by the soft flicker of candlelight. A scalpel's blade, sharpened to a surgical edge, slit through skin and muscle, and the doctors began to extract her internal organ chart, lungs, liver, stomach, and intestinice removed by hand in a sequence as clinical as it was gruesome. If this scene had unfolded in broad daylight, it would have been enough to unnerve even the steeliest observer. In the dim glow of the royal chamber, however, it became something out of a nightmare. Once the cavities were emptied, the physicians did not sheath their instruments, but reached instead for exotic spices and precious herbs, cloves, cinnamon, Myrrh treasures imported from across the Mediterranean and as far away as India, these aromatic substances, normally reserved for royal feasts or sacred rites, were here employed for one purpose only: to combat the overwhelming stench of decay. Their pungent, heady fragrance served not as a tribute, but as a temporary bulwark against nature's relentless drive to reclaim the flesh. In the candle's wavering light, the golden Tudor roses, embroidered on her garment symbols of her dynasty, grew ghostly and indistinct. Under the surgeon's skilled hands, each incision was meticulously sewn, closed with iron needles and beeswax, transforming the post-mortem dissection into a macabre form of artistry that merged rudimentary science with superstition. The belief was that without such measures, the gases building up inside the corpse would swell the body until it burst, an appalling spectacle that could turn a state funeral into a public catastrophe. Elizabeth's final wish, "Do not cut into my body, let me appear before God whole," was reduced to a whisper in that chilly room of embalming. Royal edicts could not override the immutable laws of life and death. With each rasp of the scalpel, with each measured handful of spice, her humanity was dissected and repackaged for reasons of political pragmatism rather than reverence. All of this transpired in a matter of hours. Yet its repercussions echoed through the centuries. Though the spices slowed the onset of putrefaction, they could not halt it entirely. Beneath layers of crimson velvet and ornate Tudor embroidery, Elizabeth's once proud body lay exposed to the ravages of time. Fragments of cloth fell onto the stone floor like sorrowful sighs of history itself, reminding us that even the mightiest ruler becomes dust. When Queen Elizabeth I's final breath grew faint, she pleaded with her physicians and the court, "Please, do not cut into my body. Do not mar my flesh with knife marks. Let me stand before the Almighty whole and unbroken, as I have lived." How? In that moment, the Virgin Queen not only begged for her physical form to remain intact, but also prayed that her soul would not be torn apart by handfuls of spices and cold blades. Her urgent whispers echoed through the ornate chamber, final plea before the unforgiving reality of death. On the morning of the 24th of March, Iten the last candle in Whitehall Palace guttered out after Elizabeth's passing. All royal protections and thus the authority shielding her purse immediately ceased. Under immense pressure to stage a grand state funeral, the court physicians had no choice but to obey the royal decree. Elizabeth's body must be embalmed. They prepared for the ritual, a process demanding both crude medical technique and deep knowledge of precious herbs. Her remains were carried from the throne room into the embalming chamber, where pale daylight filtered through tall windows onto the cold marble floor. The air was thick with dampness, disinfectant fumes, and the lingering scent of burnt candle wicks. On a stone slab at the center, the chief physician, accustomed to embalming nobles but never one of such weight, bowed respectfully, then signaled his assistant to bring forward the instruments. With measured precision, the sharp blades slit the temporary shroud, revealing the thin silk layers beneath. First, the physician gently opened her chest to expose the Queen's heart, the very symbol of a nation's hope and loyalty. He lifted it onto a copper tray, as though removing a priceless gem from its casing. Next, the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Once the vital organs sustaining her life were extracted from her cavities in near silence. Save for soft instructions and the rustle of linen, those now empty hollows could not be left exposed. Assistants carried in wooden casks filled with rare spice cloves, cassia bark, frankincense, camphor, even threads of saffron. These potent aromatics, normally reserved for royal feasts or sacred rites, were blended in a secret ratio and pressed into every gap in her chest and abdomen. The goal was not reverence, but pragmatism, to prevent the dreadful gases of decomposition from swelling the corpse and turning the coffin into a gruesome death bomb during the state funeral. As the spices were packed, the chief physician drew the silk shroud over the incisions and stitched it shut with iron needles and beeswax. The crimson fabric, once proudly bearing Tudor roses, now bore a lattice of fresh stitches armour for a body stripped of life's warmth. Each stitch was a solemn vow of protection, each bead of wax a desperate bid to hold her form against the march of time. Finally, Elizabeth's remains were placed into a thick lead coffin, its walls designed to contain gases and restrain the wrappings. On the lead lining, Elizabeth Regina and a delicate Tudor rose were engraved as a final mark of her identity. This lead coffin was then nested inside an ornately gilded wooden coffin, ready for its solemn voyage down the Thames. Despite the elaborate care, the embalming remained a matter of necessity rather than honour. Though Elizabeth had begged for mercy, the edicts she once commanded could not defy nature's laws. Until the moment her coffin was sealed, she could not have known that her unyielding body would endure countless incisions, aromatic fillings, and the relentless pressure of decay strategy, born of fear rather than tribute. Part 4. The 16th century witnessed no shortage of horrifying royal funeral disasters. Coffins rupturing in grand halls, flesh and bone splattering like macabre fireworks, and skeletal remains staining mosaic floors meant to evoke solemnity. In one kingdom, the coffin of a beloved king reportedly exploded before the assembled court, sending noble guests fleeing in panic as screams reverberated off the palace walls. In another instance, a queen's body swelled like a grotesque balloon and ejected a black, viscous fluid when priests opened her casket to recite the final prayers. Such tragedies drove home a stark lesson. State funerals must not only be dignified, but also biologically and mechanically secure. For Queen Elizabeth I, no margin for error remained. Her coffin was crafted as a Renaissance marvel of engineering. At its heart lay a thick lead lining, heavy enough to contain the foul gases produced by decay. This lead barrier not only blocked odours, but also restrained any expansion of the embalmed wrappings from the linen shrouds to the deep crimson velvet. On top of these layers, Elizabeth's body was swaddled in sumptuous, ruby-hued velvet as richly woven as silk, each stitch painstakingly embroidered with the Tudor rose, the white rose of York intertwined with the red rose of Lancaster, symbolising the final union of two feuding houses under her reign. That Tudor rose was more than mere decoration. It proclaimed, no matter the conflict, true power heals ancient wounds. Once the embalming was complete, dozens of jet-black iron nails were driven into the lead lining, each one engineered to withstand sudden shifts in internal pressure. The lead shell was then nestled inside an outer coffin of oaken, exceptionally durable, moisture-resistant wood renowned for lasting centuries without decay. Its exterior was slathered in gold leaf and carved in the Rococo style, then in vogue throughout European courts. With flowing scrolls and elegant leaf motifs, this double coffin design served two purposes: to offer ironclad protection against external elements and to display the utmost splendour for the funeral procession. At the appointed hour of solemn ceremony, the procession commenced. The massive oak coffin was borne down to the riverbank and placed atop the royal bargia, long, gilded vessel draped in brocade and silk, its oars slicing the water in stately rhythm. The bargemen, clad in deep blue uniforms, gripped oars tipped in gold and dipped them into the Thames with slow, deliberate strokes. The river itself ran grey as ink beneath a sombre sky, as though the heavens mourned alongside the people. Dark clouds drifted above the stone-arched bridges, casting a funereal pall over the scene. On either bank, thousands of mourners, nobles and commoners alike lined the narrow paths. There was no laughter, no lively conversation, only the sound of heavy sighs and measured footsteps. Never before in living memory had the public witnessed a royal funeral of such magnitude. Many stood with red-rimmed eyes and damp cheeks, torn between grief and fascination. They yearned to glimpse the last Tudor monarch on her final voyage. Others gazed up at the Gothic arches overhead, imagining the strong queen now drifting down the river. Her spirit carried on the timeless current. Those nearest the barge could not conceal their horror, mixed with curiosity when a peculiar scent reached them, a heady swirl of spicy cinnamon, biting cloves, and the unmistakable tang of decaying flesh. It was not the harsh stench of rotting refuse, but a clinging, haunting aromas, if the very essence of royalty refused to fade entirely. Some noble onlookers recoiled, covering their noses or raising handkerchiefs to their lips, fearful that a wisp of that funeral bouquet might forever haunt their memories. With each dip of the oars, the barge drifted toward Westminster Abbey. The gentle slap of water against wood mingled with the lament of a single funeral horn. Only instrument permitted in such a solemn rite, its notes soared and fell like a requiem, reminding all present that however grand or dramatic the ceremony, its final act was silence. That tableau, however dark, etched itself into the hearts of witnesses. They departed the riverbank in hushed reverence, pondering one question: may Gloriana's soul truly rest beneath the cold earth? As the Thames meandered on, cradling her mortal remains, no warmth it provided could ever soothe the boundless solitude of death. Even sealed within that thick lead shell, the fetid gases of decay still seeped through every crevice, reminding the world that no matter how dazzling power may shine, pride is as fragile as a candle flame in the wind. It is said that the very moment Elizabeth's coffin left the embalming chamber, the physicians heard faint hisses bursts of rancid air escaping from within like the dark whisper of the grim reaper himself. Had the coffin's lining failed under such internal pressure, it would have cracked and exploded like a corpse bomb, transforming the solemn funeral into an unspeakable horror. Imagine the assembled mourners scattering in panic. The prayers halted mid-chant, and horrified screams, replacing reverence as fragments of flesh and shroud, rained down an unthinkable catastrophe at the very heart of a state burial. By fortune, Elizabeth's lead casket withstood the ordeal. After its journey down the Thames, it was taken to Westminster Abbey, final resting place of England's monarchs and nobles for centuries. Towering stone blocks and soaring Gothic vaults embraced her remains in a sanctuary so hallowed that not even time itself dared to trespass. Echoing footsteps marked the coffin's passage through marble corridors, each step imprinting another footnote in history. The crypt doors closed behind it, and the casket was set with care beneath a side chapel, where a single shaft of coloured light filtered through a stained glass window, casting a narrow beam upon the deep crimson velvet. To onlookers, that beam seemed to transform the funeral chamber into eternal silence. Yet far below, time's ruthless advance remained ceaseless. Above ground, Elizabeth's tomb appeared as a magnificent promise of everlasting rest. A white stone plinth engraved, Elizabeth Regina, crowned by a granite canopy exquisitely carved with Tudor roses. Pilgrims and tourists see only that stately facade. Today an undying monument, evoking awe and respect. Few realize that behind those stones, in the chill of the crypt, a silent war rages between flesh and the unrelenting march of time. For Elizabeth, once the immortal emblem of royal power, death did not conclude with ceremonial grandeur. Beneath those steadfast slabs, her corpse continued to endure the ravages of decay. Gases still formed. The linen shroud turned damp and mouldy, and the velvet wrappings gradually blackened. Each lugubrious exhalation served as a grim reminder that authority endures only until the flesh yields to the cycle of life and death. Other coffins in the crypt, less ornate than Elizabeth's, sometimes disintegrated into brittle fragments at the touch of a bare hand. Hers, by contrast, remained structurally intact. Yet inside, the lead lining had warped under the relentless compression of decay, an unending nightmare sealed in metal. Faint light from the crypt's small window caught the faded Tudor rose carving, lending an eerie beauty both desolate and mournful. Centuries passed, and, despite periodic inspections, no one dared open Elizabeth's casket. Its hidden contents became a curse to any who might violate them. The acrid stench alone would turn blood to ice. and the trapped pressure could shatter the coffin with lethal force. Thus, Westminster Abbey maintains its silence, allowing Elizabeth and her terrible secret to remain entombed in darkness, unknown to all. The tale of Elizabeth I coffin, its lead lining, its Tudor velvet, transcends mere legend in English history, symbolizing the eternal struggle between humanity and death. Beneath the monumental stone lies the haunting truth that the quest for immortality is eclipsed by the inevitability of decay, and that even the most magnificent funeral rites are but a thin veil before nature's unstoppable power. In the late 19th century, as the Victorian Empire reached its zenith and began its decline, Westminster Abbey, England's spiritual and political heart, decided to grant Dean Arthur Stanley access to its long-sealed royal crypts. Stanley, renowned for his insatiable curiosity and a scion of a minor noble family, harbored a fierce passion for medieval history and European legend. When he received the special passport that opened centuries, locked doors, he stepped inside with a rush of excitement tempered by trepidation. This was his once-in-a-lifetime chance to witness for himself what he'd only ever read about in dusty tomes and scattered chronicles. Pushing through the ponderous stone door, he lowered himself into the subterranean chamber, where the only light came from a brass lantern swinging at his chest. Its flickering golden glow danced across moss-clad walls and faint Gothic carvings. The crypt air was thick with dampness, redolent of wet earth and age-old moulder scent that seemed to fuse the passage of time with the sorrow of death. Each of Stanley's footsteps echoed on the moisture-slicked flagstones like a stalled drumbeat, guiding him ever deeper into the realm of the departed. As he pressed onward, he discovered row upon row of square burial niches, each housing a rough lead slab engraved with the name and dates of kings, queens, and dukes. Yet Stanley's first stop was not at Henry VIII's tomb, nor Victoria's, but at a decayed wooden coffin nestled in a corner of the coffin of Queen Elizabeth I, brushing away centuries' worth of dust. He knelt and gently pressed his bare fingertip onto the fragile board. With a faint crackle, it crumbled to powder under his touch, revealing the crimson velvet within, now disintegrated into fragmented swatches and faded golden threads. He raised his lantern to illuminate the coffin more clearly, and realized that the once seemingly indestructible lead lining inside the wood was now warped and misshapen from nearly 3 centuries of internal pressure. The thick metal no longer lay in smooth sheets, but bulged and cracked like sloughed snakeskin, betraying the relentless push of gases born of decay. On the coffin's lid, the faded insignia, E.R. Elizabeth Regina, lingered like the last whisper of her name in that mould-ridden darkness. Stanley's initial awe swiftly mingled with sorrow. He bowed his head and murmured, "Here lies Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, in her final repose," but reverence gave way to a profound chill. He gripped the lantern's handle tightly, listening to droplets of water pattering through tiny fissures onto the stone floor, to the faint sigh of air sighing through narrow gaps. And he pictured those once opulent funerals reduced to rotting flesh and spent entrails. Setting the lantern on the cold stone, he took a step back to absorb the full tableau. This coffin held not only Elizabeth's remains, but the boundless grief of an entire dynasty. In that darkness, the lantern's flicker on the lead lid seemed like the last candle fighting a biting wind. Stanley suddenly grasped that the royal radiance which once commanded Europe now persisted only in warped metal and tattered velvet. Under that dim glow, the ephemeral nature of all power became undeniable. Stanley recalled the old prophecy. Though the crown may gleam, the flesh must return to dust. A shiver ran down his spine as he realized those words were no mere metaphor but brutal fact. No matter how lofty the throne, no amount of wealth could purchase bodily immortality. Many more secrets awaited Stanley in the crypt's deeper recesses, ancient tombs of other royals. Each coffin, a tragic chapter yet unread. But before him now stood a singular reminder. Elizabeth Regina, eternally immortalized in history, powerless beneath her lead shelter against time's slow, unrelenting decay. What stunned Dean Arthur Stanley more than anything was his next discovery, directly above Elizabeth's coffin. In the same cramped vault lay the coffin of Mary I, Bloody Mary, her blood-stained and relentless cousin. For over 4 centuries, these two women had been fierce rivals on England's political stage. Now they shared a narrow, damp chamber beneath Westminster Abbey. Fate, it seemed, had bound them together, opponents in life, now permanent neighbours in death. Stanley knelt at Mary's tomb, the lantern's wavering glow revealing her skull's yellowed teeth and faintly mottled bone in the gloom. He recalled how Mary had terrorized Protestants, earning her infamous moniker for executing over 280 dissenters. Yet here she lay, silent and motionless, mere inches from the remains of the very cousin who had signed her death warrant. The political hatred that once set them at each other's throats had been replaced by the hush of the crypt. The air around the two coffins was thick with the odour of decay, a heady, suffocating blend of ancient spices packed into Elizabeth's embalmed body and the musty dampness of the stone chamber. That pungent aroma clung to the tattered burial wrappings and stained the very breath of the vault. Stanley inhaled deeply. Confronted by the raw reality of mortality, what had once held regal splendour beneath flickering candles now lay reduced to rotting flesh and crumbling wood. He studied Mary's lid, its lead lining corroded, and the wooden shell so fragile that flakes crumbled at his touch. Beneath the rotted exterior, the faint engraving M.R. Maria Regina barely remained a final, fading claim to her royal identity. Mary's coffin was far simpler than Elizabeth's. No crimson velvet or Tudor rose embroidery. Only patches of discoloured silk and barely discernible Gothic embellishments. To Stanley, the contrast spoke volumes. One queen's final tribute, stripped away to practicality, the other still draped in the pageantry of dynasty. In life, Mary and Elizabeth had represented diametrically opposed visions. Mary championed unyielding Catholic rule, while Elizabeth upheld a tempered Protestant settlement. Their 20-plus years of rivalry had included imprisonment, plots, and executions. Mary endured long confinement, witnessing the cruelties of palace intrigue. Elizabeth answered religious insurrection with swift, sometimes ruthless, justice. Their legacies were forged in blood, and betrayal yet in this silent tomb. Such differences were meaningless. Here, in the dim crypt, both bodies shared the same fate, ground down by time and nature, forgotten by all but the stone and dust. Shreds of burial cloth fell to the flagstones, mingling with centuries of debris like a grim mosaic. The chamber held no movement save for Stanley's measured breathing, and the occasional drip of moisture from unseen cracks, forming a dirge of silence that seemed to ask, had these queens any final words for each other? Stanley circled Mary's resting place, tracing the fractures in the lead with his fingertip. Every crack testified to the relentless build-up of decompositional gas pressing from within. Mary had been interred above her cousin, perhaps an echo of her royal status in life but underground. Such hierarchies vanished. Here, in the earth's embrace, all were equal in entropy. He remembered Elizabeth's dying plea, to face God whole and unviolated. What of Mary? Stanley found no record of her own wishes for a peaceful interment. Had she, too, hoped to be spared this ordeal, or did she accept the harsh necessities of state funerals? No answer emerged from the shadows only, the hollow gloom and the faint scrawl of history in lead and wood. In that moment, Stanley felt the intimate connection of their destinies, Elizabeth and Mary, two sides of the same Tudor coin. One wielded mercy and political finesse, the other steadfast faith and ruthless zeal. Both inspired awe and fear across Europano, reduced to rotting forms that spoke only the language of decay. Quietly, he lit a second candle and placed it between the coffins, its small flame illuminating the corroded lids and mold-eaten surfaces. In that fragile light, He offered a silent prayer for their tormented souls. Then, with a last lingering look, he withdrew from the vault, leaving Mary and Elizabeth alone once more in eternal darkness, their rivalry erased, their bodies intertwined by death. They reminded the living that human ambition is fleeting, and that in the end, only silence endures. Returning to the world above, Stanley carried with him the unspoken tale of the two Tudor cousins, an epic of power and vengeance, followed by a shared destiny beneath stone and dust. He knew the crypt still held more secrets, but the image of Mary and Elizabeth side by side, steeped in the mingled scents of rot and spice, would haunt his every step through aeons-old manuscripts. Dean Arthur Stanley stood silently beside the coffin, the lantern's flickering glow illuminating the bruised red velvet. He sensed each faint breath of the vault merging with the weak hiss of decay gases trapped inside the thick lead. The coffin lidens, firmly sealed now, bulged unnaturally, stretched like a fragile balloon, sending a shiver through Stanley. He lightly touched the edge of the rotted wood, and felt how brittle it was, and a careless move could send it crumbling into fragments. The velvet, which once symbolized royal power, was now speckled with greenish-yellow mold, like diseased patches on a tapestry. The lantern light danced over dark streaks on the fabric, evoking the image of regal silk gasping for a final breath. Brittle shards of burial cloth fell onto the marble floor, revealing the decayed wood beneath. Holding one fragment in his palm, Stanley heard the dry crackle of wood splintering, as though history itself sighed in sorrow. Beneath the rotted wood, the lead lining, originally sturdy, had warped into small bulges and hairline cracks. Stanley pressed his ear against the coffin, listening for the faint clink of metal as air shifted within its layers. He stepped back, imagining the internal pressure pushing against the mummified remains, as if the last spark of life clung desperately to this cold vessel. The iron nails that once held the lid tight were now so rusted they hung loose. Some had even popped free, leaving tiny holes behind. The scent of oxidized metal mingled with the stench of rotting flesh, making the air around him oppressive. Stanley crouched to pick up a loose nail and saw its head worn away halfway, flakes of rust testifying to time's relentless erosion, no matter the value or authority once held. Yet, amid the ruin, a few intricate details still gleamed faintly, the final vestiges of a dynasty. Stanley shone his lantern closer, revealing the delicate, faded threads of Tudor rose embroidery intertwined, white and red petals still stubbornly clinging in place. That pale red rose was the last witness to England's golden age. In that desolate tableau, to wood and fabric fragments, formed a grim tapestry, preserving the image of a queen who once commanded Europe's respect. The physical heart, the emblem of life and authority, had long since vanished, leaving only fragile material memories, decayed cloth, crumbled wood, misshapen metal, and the ghostly outlines of Tudor stitches, the faint aromas of cloves, cinnamon, and myrrh from the ancient embalming wafted around Stanley. Recalling the once grand ceremony now reduced to the era's final breath, he quietly lit a second small candle, its flame casting a gentle light on the coffin, as if trying to stir buried memories. In the hushed air, a draught whispered through cracks in the crypt, reminding him that no struggle could withstand the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. That faded Tudor rose embroidery served as a solemn reminder. Glory is fleeting, and time is the invincible deity. Stanley folded up his lantern as its golden glow dimmed, restoring the crypt to eternal darkness and silence. The coffin continued to bulge. The velvet rotted away, and the Tudor rose lay pale and tarnished testament to a dynasty's final demise. Above ground, Westminster Abbey retains its serene and majestic air, drawing visitors from around the world each day. They stroll leisurely along marble aisles, marveling at the glittering stained glass windows, pausing before stone plaques inscribed with the names of kings, queens, and great figures. The organ's solemn chords echo beneath soaring vaults, joined by choral hymns that fill the space with a sense of peace and reverence. Guests smile for photographs, listen to guides recounting tales of glorious history, and gaze in awe at the grandeur surrounding them. Yet just beneath that thick layer of stone lies an entirely different realm. A cold, damp crypt holds the bodies of monarchs, subject to nature's ruthless laws. The musty smell of mildew and the faint trace of long-decayed embalming spices seep through cracks in the marble floor. If someone stooped to listen, they might hear the faint whisper of wind coursing through hidden passages, as if the tomb itself sighed with the weight of forgotten lives. The visitors above remain oblivious, immersed in stories of Tudor triumph and the soaring melodies of hymns. They fail to sense the silent tragedy unfolding below, the slow disintegration of once proud bodies consumed by death and time. This stark juxtaposition, splendor above, desolation below, lends the abbey an almost mystical quality, luminous ceremony overhead, an unspoken wasteland beneath. In the nave, worshippers feel their spirits lifted by tales of resilience and hope. They forget that beneath their feet, each confident step carries the warmth of life yet just inches below. Decay silently works its lethal art. They do not hear the faint crack of brittle bone, the subtle tang of rot on the air, or the sight of tattered burial cloth drifting down to the crypt floor. In the Great East, candlelight dances on ornate carvings, conjuring an ethereal realm where life and death merge. But one flight of steps down reveals a stark reality: damp stone, oppressive darkness, and the mute stillness of centuries-old remains. The prayers and music above may ring out clear, but the crypt's silent lament is the true requiem of flesh. Tourists pause before a relief depicting Elizabeth I's coronation, admiring her crown and sumptuous robes. They discuss her political acumen, her defeat of the Spanish Armada, and the laws she enacted. Few realize that her very body endures a gruesome fate just below. They honor her name in stone while forgetting the hidden corpse beneath their feet, drenched in daylight. The abbey's walls proclaim human triumph and endurance. Visitors bow their heads in prayer beside royal tombs, whispering pledges of loyalty. They pray that the ancestors rest in peace and that the realm endures forever. Yet in the crypt below, the spirits of those interred hear different sounds: wind rattling through cracks, droplets of moisture echoing off stone, and the slow sigh of metal expanding under the pressure of decay. Amid the bustle above, one might wonder, do those wandering pilgrims ever suspect the grim truth below? Could they be warned? History's chains ensure the crypt remains locked, its secrets revealed only to those brave enough to descend the stairs and confront the horror of mortality. This contrast forged between triumph and tragedy imbues the abbey with an uncanny power. Beneath flickering candles, whom's exult gloriana, Elizabeth I, while the lingering scent of rancid spices recalls the mortal plight of a once virgin queen. This fusion of glory and decay weaves a tapestry of the human condition, where pride and dissolution stand side by side. When visitors eventually depart the abbey, they carry memories of architectural splendor, heroic tales, and sacred solemnity. What they never see is the abbey's other half a silent testament to mortality that lies buried in its crypt, forever contrasting with the grandeur above. The decayed coffin of Elizabeth I marks not only the end of a glorious life, but also delivers a brutal reminder of nature's immutable laws. Even supreme power must bow before the cycle of birth, decay, and death. What was once sumptuous crimson velvet, symbolizing regal authority, has now faded and mottled, with greenish-blue mold-like bullet holes tearing through memory itself. The thick lead lining, originally robust and unyielding, is warped and twisted under the relentless pressure of rotting gases. its once smooth metal surface etched with the wrinkles of time. The sturdy English oak that formed the outer shell has crumbled into ash, its fragments falling like silent testimony that human craftsmanship too must surrender to erosion. Scattered on the cold stone floor lie the last remnants of Tudor embroidery, delicate red roses and crisp white petals once woven with wealth, loyalty, and pride. Each stitch is now a fragment of physical memory, bearing witness to past triumphs. When you gaze upon them, you cannot help but feel a pang of sorrow. Those symbols of power and unity, born of gold thread and devotion, are now mere brittle shreds. This image etches itself into the mind. No hero, no wise monarch may defy mortality. The contrast between the coffin's former grandeur and its current ruin jolts us into a stark realization. All things made of flesh and cloth eventually return to dust. What endures is story, memory, and the meaning we attach to them. Elizabeth's true legacy does not lie in that rotting vault, but in the history books, the portraits that still adorn halls and galleries, and the countless tales of her life that resonate through the ages. Her name, Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, remains immortal in England's collective imagination. The dragon of Tudor might and the Tudor rose of pride have faded into faint echoes, yet they persist in human remembrance. Beneath the cold stones of Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth's mortal remains have long since mingled with the earth, dissolving into invisible dust. Picture each grain of soil as a tiny cradle for a fragment of her being, carrying forward the warmth and majesty she once embodied. The gradual embrace of earth and the springing grass overhead form nature's own funeral rites, returning her body to the maternal bosom of creation. As new growth sprouts above her grave, it celebrates not just renewal, but the ceaseless cycle of life and death up above. Visitors marvel at the Abbey's ornate tombs. They snap photographs, read inscriptions, and marvel at the architectural splendor, never pausing to wonder about the hidden tragedy beneath their feet. Few reflect on what lies behind each engraved stone, a once brilliant flesh and blood presence, now extinguished and broken down by unseen forces. Elizabeth's story is more than a chronicle of her regnate, is a haunting saga concealed beneath ritual and pageantry. Looking upon her ruined coffin, we find a profound lesson for all generations. Never allow the pursuit of power to blind us to life's ultimate impermanence. Material wealth will fade, but human spirit, ideas, and deeds can outlast the transient flesh they once animated. Elizabeth I bequeathed a legacy of resilience, wisdom, and measured governance qualities that ensure her name endures far beyond any physical monument. No matter how the world changes, the image of Gloriana lives on in chronicles, in grand portraits, and in the hearts of those who study her life. Scholars continue to examine her reign. Playwrights and filmmakers reinterpret her story, and artists capture her essence on canvas. Each retelling evokes not only a powerful sovereign, but also the spirit of the English Renaissancea time when culture, science, and the arts blossomed under her protection. That decayed coffin is now merely the last earthly shell, claiming the ravages of time, hidden forever in the crypt's silence. Yet Elizabeth's name, Elizabeth Regina, remains an emblem of the indomitable human spirit. Though her flesh was broken and the pomp of funeral rites imperiled, her story rings out like an epic poem that transcends centuries. The end of this chapter is not a period but a comma in a narrative that will be retold endlessly. Beneath those solemn stones, Elizabeth paid the price of pride and power, and her soul drifts through history as a poignant reminder. No one can conquer nature's laws, yet reputation and legacy can exceed the constraints of flesh and bone. Before us now is the image of a shattered, coffin-faded velvet, warped lead, and tarnished Tudor embroidery, united in a timeless lesson on mortality and the enduring value of human will. Elizabeth I may have departed this world, but her legend still glows in the minds of the living, like a fire that never goes out. Beneath the lifeless stone of Westminster Abbey, the decay of Queen Elizabeth I's continues unabated. Even the thick lead casing, intended to contain her remains, cannot halt the relentless build-up of gases from rotting flesh. Dean Arthur Stanley, the Victorian scholar who has devoted his life to exploring royal tombs, stood in stunned silence before the coffin's lid, which now bulged grotesquely like a bloated balloon straining to burst and threatened to unleash an unspeakable stench upon the world above. Once painstakingly woven from the finest crimson silk, the velvet draping now lay faded and puckered, scarred by mould in sickly shades of green and yellow. Tattered fragments hung in shreds, as though a funeral pall had been torn to pieces by time itself. Under the lantern's flicker, Stanley watched ghostly patches of decay spread across the fabric, a jarring contrast to the regal splendor it once embodied. The Tudor rose embroidery symbols of dynastic unity and royal authority remained faintly stitched into the cloth, but each stitch had curled and faded with the passing centuries. Where once bold white and red petals proclaimed triumph, now only brittle threads clung tenuously to the ruined velvet, whispering a final reminder that even empires must yield. Stanley rubbed his eyes and bent to examine one of the corroded iron nails that once secured the lid. It had loosened and fallen free, lying amid chips of metal and wood. The tang of rust mingled with the acrid odor of decomposition, creating a mournful note that resonated through the silent vault. A single draught through a tiny gap sent a shiver down his spine as he imagined those gases slipping into the world above. Vice-like and unstoppable, peering closer, he saw the lead lining itself had warped under the pressure. Bulges and hairline fractures marred the metal, transforming the coffin's once sleek walls into a crumpled, skin-like surface. In the lantern's pale gleam, the lead appeared as a withered mask, sagging and distorted, a testament to nature's ultimate victory over human artifice. Nothing can withstand the decomposition force of time and biology. In that bone-chilling crypt, vapors of decay formed a damp haze, saturating every fibre of the burial wrappings. Stanley closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, tasting the faint traces of embalming spice cloves, cinnamon, myrrh muted, relics of an elaborate ritual, powerless against centuries of rot. The illusion of purity once bestowed by ceremony was shattered. Lost in thought, Stanley recalled the medieval medical treatises he had studied, which celebrated those very spices as bulwarks against putrefaction. Yet after nearly 400 years, their potency had long since dissipated. Now they survived only as crumbling granules, sparse and brittle, pressed into the shroud, in a vain attempt to preserve dignity in the face of biology's inexorable march. In the damp, flickering gloom, Stanley glimpsed small fragments of Tudor velvet scattered like fallen stars in the night. He knelt to pick up a scrap, letting its brittle threads sift through his fingers. Even in their frailty, these relics of past grandeur spoke of a once unstoppable reign, now reduced to the most delicate trappings of memory. The lantern's light could not mask the metallic clinks of shifting lead or the faint crackle of decaying cloth. Each sound echoed like a savage symphony, heralding an apocalypse of flesh. There were no drums or trumpets here, only the harrowing chorus of bone, wood, and rusted metal resonating through the crypt. Setting the lantern down, Stanley retreated a few steps to survey the scene. In that moment, the coffin seemed alive, thrashing against its lead bonds, striving to break free and spew its miasma of decay and despair into the surrounding darkness. The vision was both horrifying and oddly compelling. Time and entropy stood revealed as the final, inescapable conquerors. A wave of sorrow welled up in Stanley's chest. He realized with sudden clarity that no matter how lavish the royal funeral rites, biological decay remained the ultimate arbiter. Elizabeth's coffin, from its regal velvet to its seemingly invincible lead liner and stalwart oak frame, had, fallen victim to the same relentless laws that govern every mortal fate. Turning away, Stanley carried with him the haunting image of the coffin's swollen lid, the mottled velvet, and the fading Tudor embroidery proof that even the loftiest rains crumble into dust over time. The silent vault of Westminster Abbey still bore witness to this unspoken lament, its echo a cautionary lesson on the transience of human pride. And so, in that eternal darkness, the coffin continued its agonized expansion and contraction, in tune with the crypt's sorrowful breath, awaiting the final revelation of a lifelong departed. High above, Westminster Abbey remains a picture of serene grandeur, where thousands of visitors each day wander leisurely along gleaming marble pathways. They gaze at memorial plaques and delicate reliefs, pause beneath towering columns, and listen to the organ's solemn chords echoing under the vaulted ceiling. No one among them imagines that just feet below, buried beneath those solid stones, lies a scene of utter desolation, tattered velvet scraps, a rotting coffin, and a suffocating scent of decay mingled with long-withered spices. This stark contrast lends the abbey an almost supernatural aura. On the surface, it is dignified, stately, a shrine to faith and power. Underneath, a silent tragedy unfolds, in utter darkness. Visitors feel the cool touch of polished stone underfoot, unaware of the damp chill and the rancid odors seeping through cracks, subtle reminders of fame's fleeting nature. Above them, choral hymns, soar and stained-glass windows paint the interior in jewel-bright light. Yet that radiant beauty cannot dispel the gloom pressing down from the crypt below. Tourists admire the intricate carvings of saints and martyrs, envisioning themselves transported to a medieval pageant of knights and courtiers. They marvel at the coronation relief of Henry VIII and the dramatic depiction of St. George slaying the dragon, their eyes drawn upward to mosaic floors laid in ornate star patterns. But if they stooped to peer into the stairwell leading to the crypt, they would see a very different sight. Trickles of water tracing damp stone steps, mold spreading across the walls, and shreds of once luxurious velvet carpeting the floor. That juxtaposition is both haunting and uncanny. Up here, people find solace in the abbey's sacred atmosphere, lulled by golden candlelight and the organ's rich harmonies. Down there, the air is thick and oppressive, heavy with the faint tang of clove, cinnamon, and myrrh, long since past their prime, interlaced with the unmistakable odor of human decay. The rituals above ring with life and hope, while beneath the abbey's floorboards, those same rituals have given way to nature's inevitable reclaiming of flesh. Some seniors pause before a tomb, resting a hand on the cool stone and whispering prayers for the peace of the departed. Yet in the vault below, the departed rest uneasily. Wind whispers through fissures, water drips in endless rhythm, and the slow groan of lead-lined coffins succumbs to the pressure of rotting gases. Above, the faithful chant in praise of Gloriana, Elizabeth's first cherished epithet, blissfully unaware that her mortal remains lie in a state of gradual dissolution. This duality between the splendor above and the decay below heightens the abbey's mystique. Beneath the prismatic glow of stained glass, the promise of resurrection seems assured. But one descent down the limestone stairs will take you into a realm where that light never reaches, where shadows reign and the remnants of empire lie in ruin. Westminster Abbey, for all its outward majesty, conceals a wordless tragedy reserved for those who dare to descend. Visitors leave at day's end, cameras full of beauty and minds full of history. Yet few pause to remember the crypt's silent testament. In that hidden world, fragments of velvet, mold-blotted stone, and trickling water continue to tell a different story, one of ambition's demise and the inexorable passage of time. So when you depart the abbey bathed in sunlight, spare a thought for the catacombs beneath your feet, where the final act of glory and decay performs its timeless, unending ritual. The decayed coffin of Queen Elizabeth I stands not only as stark proof of her physical demise, but also as the most vivid relic of a bygone dynasty. The once proud English oak has crumbled to ash. The rich crimson velvet has dissolved into ragged tatters, and the lead lining has warped under the unceasing pressure of decompositional gas. Together they form a scene of utter desolation. Yet amid this wreckage, a few exquisite details linger. The Tudor crown embroidery and the faint ER, Elizabeth Regina, engraving cling on, fragile vestiges of a power that once awed Europe. Those tattered scraps of cloth, though torn and battered, I still hold a flicker of warmth and echo of the decisions, the treaties, and the battles that shaped a formidable England. Imagine Elizabeth herself brushing her hand over this very velvet as she swore her oath, or signing the orders that dispatched her navy against the Spanish Armada. Each fold of fabric now preserves a memory of her bold choices, the admiration of her subjects, and the pulse of history itself. But the coffin's ruin is also a powerful warning. No matter how enlightened or mighty, all mortals must eventually dissolve into dust, leaving behind only memory and emblem. Rusted iron nails lie strewn among the debris, challenging anyone who dares approach. The faint tang of decay mingles with once sacred spices, whispering the lament of regal flesh now surrendered to nature's inexorable will. Gone are the royal robes, and the crown's gleamingly shards of material remain, poised to return to the earth. Dean Stanley, carefully gathered fragments of velvet, splinters of wood, rust flakes, and bits of lead into a leather pouch. To him, these were not mere artifacts, but shards of Gloriana's consciousness. Once known as the Virgin Queen, her body was fragmented, yet her story endures intact in the annals of history. In that moment, Stanley realized Elizabeth's true legacy lay not in any tomb, but in the chronicles that generations continue to write, in paintings that capture her steady gaze beneath candlelight, and in the enduring thrill of her life's drama, though her mortal shell lay shattered under the Abbey's stones. Elizabeth Regina's legend remains undefeated and everlasting testament to human will, far more enduring than any coffin's rotting timbers or crumbling lead. Beyond her decayed flesh, the true legacy of Elizabeth lives on in words and works of art. In the annals of history, she is celebrated as Gloriana, the Virgin Queen, a symbol of England's golden age. Paintings, portraits, and monuments capture her regal bearing, sharp intellect, and indomitable courage. Scholars scrutinize her policies, from shrewd economic reforms and deft diplomacy to her generous patronage of the arts. The saga of the defeated Spanish Armada still echoes in history lectures, inspiring national pride. While the music and drama of Shakespeare's age stand as cultural pinnacles achieved under her reign, Renaissance sur la chronicle, precious manuscripts, and architectural landmarks all bear her imprint, proving that though the body is finite, spirit and resolve endure. Across Europe, court painters rendered her likeness in sumptuous gowns and glittering jewels. A globe in one hand, to signify her global ambitions. The most famous of these, the Darnley portrait, shows her with alabaster skin and steadfast eyes, an image later replicated in marble and bronze for public squares from London to Vienna. Poets likewise immortalized her. Edmund Spenser cast Gloriana as a paragon of justice and virtue in The Fairy Queen, seeding poetic traditions that venerated her character for centuries. Politically, Elizabeth earns her reputation as a deft stateswoman. She balanced the royal coffers by lowering certain taxes while promoting overseas trade. The expansion of the Royal Navy and the licensing of privateer so-called crowned pirates opened new commercial routes to the Americas and Asia, planting English flags on distant shores. Her savvy use of marriage alliances, or broken betrothals, helped maintain a precarious peace between Protestant and Catholic powers, averting full-scale religious wars that ravaged the continent. Under her aegis, English letters flourished. Shakespeare, Marlowe, Johnson and their contemporaries transformed the stage into a living laboratory of human drama. Henry V and Julius Caesar celebrated leadership and patriotism, qualities directly inspired by Elizabeth's own reign. Audiences at the Globe Theatre thrilled to tales of conquest and honour, aware that these were not mere fictions, but reflections of a nation rising under a strong sovereign. Music at Elizabeth's court reached similarly soaring heights. Composers like William Byrd and Thomas Tallis wrote madrigals and sacred motets for royal banquets and religious ceremonies. Lute and viol consorts performed them in sumptuous banquet halls, projecting England's cultural confidence to all who attended. Those compositions remain in repertoires, to echoes of a Renaissance that declared England both devout and forward-looking. Elizabethan architecture also bears her stamp. The sprawling palace of Whitehall, later replaced by banqueting house. The grand terraces of Hampton Court, and countless country houses, embodying the distinctive Elizabethan style, with red and black checkered brickwork, mullioned windows, and symmetrical, walled gardens. Many of these structures have been restored as cherished UNESCO sites, drawing millions who marvel at their blend of Gothic grandeur and classical restraint. Diplomacy under Elizabeth extended beyond treaties to extravagant gift-giving. She dispatched rare pearls, fine English woolens, illuminated manuscripts, and even early scientific instruments to foreign courts, forging cultural and scientific alliance. Those exchanges laid the groundwork for what we now call cultural diplomacy, branding England as a hub of learning and innovation. In education and medicine, Elizabethan patronage planted seeds that would bloom in the scientific revolution. She endowed new lectureships at Oxford and Cambridge in medicine, astronomy, and mathematics, encouraging translations of Hippocrates and Galen that elevated English medical practice. Court physicians, empowered by royal favour, compiled systematic casebooks that advanced public health and set precedents still echoed in modern clinical records. Today, her image thrives on screen and in print. From the Oscar-winning film Elizabeth, 1998, with Cate Blanchett's commanding performance, to the BBC's The Virgin Queen, 2005, and numerous documentaries for global streaming platforms, Gloriana continues to fascinate. Pop songs and stage musicals reference her reign, introducing her to new generations and keeping her spirit alive in popular culture. Modern leaders still invoke Elizabethan policy as a model of flexible yet firm governance. Business executives and diplomats study her balance of firmness and charm, calling it the Virgin Queen's approach to decision-making under pressure. In this way, the lessons of her reign shape boardrooms and foreign ministries as much as they do history classrooms. More than 5 centuries have passed since her body returned to the earth beneath Westminster Abbey's cold stones. Yet her name still shines. Every Renaissance manuscript, every surviving Elizabethan facade, and every scholarly debate reaffirms that while the flesh is fleeting, the force of character, intellect, and artistry can transcend time. Gloriana is truly immortal, not in the rotting coffin that once held her, but in the ongoing human story, where greatness lives on in idea and inspiration long after the flesh has perished. Finally, the decayed tomb of Elizabeth I stands as a monumental reminder that time is the ultimate adversary to all power. Beneath those cold stones of Westminster Abbey, her once mighty body has been reduced to dust, velvet shreds, and weathered lead proof that even Europe's most formidable queen could not defy nature's cycle of birth, aging, illness, and death. Though her flesh has vanished, her name, Policius, and image remain immortal in history. Imagine those same stones, which once shielded the remains of a great sovereign, now lying atop fragments of history-rotten oak splinters, crumbling velvet, and warped lead. As we turn the pages of the past, we see her reign in all its glory. Yet we also absorb a profound lesson in impermanence. Nothing endures except human memory and works of art. And in these records, Gloriana continues to live, inspiring generations to come. Today, whenever scholars reopen a history tome to recount the defeat of the Spanish Armada or her deft religious settlements, they invoke her spirit. In theatre, Shakespeare's plays echo the courage and complexity of her age. In portraiture and statuary, artists capture her steely gaze and regal bearing. Each lecture, each exhibition, each film about her life keeps the Virgin Queen alive far beyond any rotting coffin. Above ground, tourists pause at the marble floor, tracing the path of her funeral procession. Below ground, her tomb lies invisible, a silent testament to mortality. But the broken coffin is not the end of Elizabeth's story. It is the threshold into eternity, where her legacy transcends flesh and bone. As we depart Westminster's hallowed halls, let us carry with us the Abbey's unspoken secret, that only spirit and will are truly immortal, and that beneath every monument lies the fragile, fleeting remains of a once great life.